All right, welcome everyone to the Lead Generation World podcast. My name is Michael Faree. We've got a good show for you planned today. We've got Ben Tyrrell of MVF Global with us today. He is the head of customer success, and we're going to be talking a lot of lead gen shop and what companies are doing to be successful with the leads that they do purchase. And I really like this conversation for a number of reasons. One, I'm really happy to see companies like MVF have an individual like Ben that not only cares about just selling a lead, but also are they being successful with the leads that they're buying. I think this is, at its core, sort of our passion here at Lead Generation World, which is trying to bring the industry together to be more transparent and promote best practices. But even more hyper-focused than that is helping brands be successful with leads. I think the lead generation ecosystem is an important part of the success of so many companies. And part of that is when, it's not just about buying a lead. It's how do you, once you buy the lead, how do you work the lead and be successful with it? Because it's just not as simple as just buying the lead and assuming you're going to have success with it. So it's really cool to bring on companies like MVF and Ben to the show to talk about what they're doing and how they're supporting industry, the brands within the industry. And I love, so if there's a company out there, if you're listening now, if you want to be a part of this podcast and you promote best practices and helping this industry grow in a real meaningful way, please reach out to me. I'd love to have a conversation with you. But yeah, so we've got Ben with us today. Before we bring Ben in, I just wanted to share some news. We've got Lead Generation World London coming up in October. Registration is going to be opening March 25th, so that's coming around the corner. Keep an eye out for that. If you're interested in supporting a conference that is looking to promote best practices and bring the industry together and help it continue to grow, we have sponsorship opportunities. We're also going to have an exhibit area for about 30 companies to have a stand as well. So really, really good opportunity to support an event and promote your brand amongst the industry. Feel free to reach out to me. You can go to leadgenerationworld.com and just fill out the contact form. You can go to leadgenerationworld.com/London. There is a form on there for sponsorships that you can reach out to me as well, and I'd love to talk with you and get you involved. So that's really exciting. But yeah, let's go ahead and bring Ben into the conversation, and let's start talking some shop. All right, everyone. Welcome to Lead Generation World podcast. I'm with Ben Tyrrell from MVF Global. Welcome, Ben. Thanks for doing this with me today.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So we were talking a lot before I hit record and just kind of chatting it up a little bit about the industry and the UK market and different things with lead buyers and sellers, and we'll sort of dive into that here.
Sure.
But first, for those that don't know about MVF, just give me a rundown on what MVF you guys specialize in, and then what exactly you do with the company.
Sure. So we're a relatively big entity now. We're up to way beyond 400 staff. We started off really as a B2B lead generator, really as a sort of a standard intermediary proposition through a couple of our brands, one of which is Expert Market, where we would look at, one-to-many models on really sexy things like photocopiers and systems, franking machines, vending, that kind of thing. It's still a really large part of our business, but we've broadened out sort of geographically as well as broadened out in terms of the provision internally that we provide. So we're really sort of a cross-vertical lead generator now, encompassing B2B, B2C verticals. We've still got a big market research division, and increasingly, all sorts of other areas that we're looking to target. We've got an office in Austin, Texas, as well, on your side of the pond.
Yep.
Headquartered here in London, which is where the majority of our marketing staff and the rest of the staff are. I started off with MVF 5 years ago. I came across this is quite a random story, but I guess most people's stories about lead generation and how they got into it are quite random. But I
run
an international removals business in Asia. And I scaled that business up on the back of buying leads from a Dutch lead provider called TELUS, who were one of the really early European pioneers back in the sort of mid-2000s. I sold my business, decided that I should do an MBA, came back to the UK to do an MBA, and then joined MVF to head up the relocations vertical that they had. And quickly then sort of developed into looking at the entirety of the B2C, the consumer-facing businesses, helped to drive the growth of that across the business. It's now the biggest part of the business, actually, the consumer-facing stuff. I've now moved slightly within that into the customer success piece. So I head up the customer success team at MVF, really looking at and trying to work with the partners that we've got and their processes to sort of enhance lead flow through systems, and also to work in partnership together, because that's ultimately what. In fact, I've got a little note pinned on my office wall, which is something that I talk to all of my sales guys about, which is to transcend the transactional. We're not a lead seller, we're a lead partner, and it's very much about that partnership that we're really seeking to sort of push. All of
that was one thing we were sort of talking about before we hit record here was, I'm a firm believer that, the lead generation ecosystem, whether that's, that includes the lead buyers, the lead sellers, the service providers, whether it's the call center or a lead management system or a CRM or a data validation company, whatever it may be, is really a unique ecosystem where everybody sort of does need each other. Now, there's a lot of people that, want to do everything in-house, and they can do everything in-house, and they could generate their leads and they could build their own, CRM, or they can do all those different things. But generally there's a limit to the scale that people can grow internally, and to be able to leverage partnerships like MVF or anybody else is really important to being able to be fully realized as a company and hit a scale. So that point of view of being a partner, it's not you're not just selling leads, you're really partnering with a company that is trying to grow.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. We tell people that, that's it. We're a partner in growth. We're the sort of rocket fuel for high growth companies. And having been through a number of cycles, I'm nearly 6 years with MVF now. We absolutely do provide rocket fuel for companies that want to grow. But I think interesting, you mentioned that really what it comes down to is I do more and more of the customer success pieces. It's really about the particular commercial goals of a company in a particular moment of time or cycle. And there are lots of companies that we work with that want very, very rapid, very, very high growth, in which case we can devise systems that can help them get to that point. And there are some businesses that, I mentioned the relocations industry, that's a really interesting one. There are some businesses there that don't want to grow at all. They've got trucks, they've got men, they want to fill them, that's it. They don't need to do 10% more year on year, because no one's asking them and no one's pushing them to do that growth. So it's really sort of aligning what we've got to the sort of business aims.
Well, and those guys aren't marketers, right? They're not digital marketing professionals. They're movers, relocation specialists, and that's what they specialize in. So leveraging a company that has, I think you said, even before the interview, 200 marketers on your team and staff.
200 marketers, 30 channels, really multi-channel approach. There's all sorts of things that can provide. And ultimately, the beauty of digital marketing, I hesitate to even say the word digital marketing. It's just marketing, isn't it? So the marketing campaigns that we can run, the beauty of the digital platforms that we use is the ability to provide transparent marketing systems. And the more you partner with the sales process, you then end up with the terrifying concept for some companies that they can have an actually transparent sales process as well as a marketing input process. Blending those things together, I mean, in many respects, it's a CFO's dream. It's almost like a perfectly transparent marketing machine that can provide ROI at the required levels and the required scale. So it's a fantastic platform that we've got.
That and it's interesting because so I was on I had a conversation right before this with a gentleman there that was at a very, very large tech company, and they bought a lot of B2B leads.
Mm,
And he was talking about realizing that at one point in his career they started realizing that the lead sources weren't really doing what they said they were doing. They were generating maybe uncompliant data. The
sure.
opt-in wasn't maybe there, and they didn't know this because there wasn't any transparency to this until they
Yeah.
started to talk with people on the phone regularly and going, "Hey, I never filled out this form."
Yeah.
um, and this is sort of the problem with the industry as a whole, is that there isn't a lot of transparency with
No.
some partnerships.
No, and I'm a kind of a systems kind of guy. So what I love about it is the ability to create those sort of transparent systems that are not only compliant, um, well, obviously compliant, but in terms of transparently compliant at all
Right.
stages. But also, like I said, in terms of the ROI number and that cost of acquisition piece is really providing that transparency that can, transcend the normal boundaries of a client vendor relationship. We've been involved in pitches to investors of our clients on occasion because they recognize that our partnership can help fuel their aims for the business rather than the current aims of the current
Sure.
owner.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of, it's really bringing all the stakeholders into the system and then working through it, which is something that excites me and keeps
Yeah.
me basically on the road with clients all over Europe and the world.
Yeah. And I think there's a couple areas there's probably a number of areas that may be an understatement, that slow the growth of this industry, slow the growth of lead gen companies like yourself, slow the growth of lead buyers. And one is transparency with regards to lead quality, how that relates, and if the quality is not good. Because if people have an inherent bad taste in their mouth from working with a company that
Yeah,
wasn't doing things correctly or whatever it may be, then go to you, they're holding you, unfortunately, MVF, to those same expectations or things that they sort of dealt with within the past. And then you have people that go, I just not going to ever buy a quote unquote lead ever again,
yeah,
because it's all bad. It's all bad. And so that's stopping, right? That's stopping the growth of the industry. And the second thing, is the success of brands with the leads that they buy. Because I think on a previous podcast, and I probably told the story a couple times, but at one point I was a lead seller as well, and
yeah,
generated a bunch of leads and worked with an insurance company that a massive insurance company that didn't know exactly how to distribute and work leads. And while it was a massive account, it was hugely unsuccessful because they didn't know how to distribute leads to their agent force, and they didn't know how to call, and they didn't know how to provide feedback
yeah.
to us. And that's another thing that slows down, and that's sort of segues into what you really do with MVF and helping brands be more successful after they got the lead, right?
Yeah, and also, I've been there before in the past where you can have big monster companies that their key KPI appears to be volume of leads, not efficiency or
Yeah.
efficiency of leads going through. And in many cases, that's an incredibly tempting thing to do for the lead generation world. But really, the sort of the valued position is really to stop and say, hold on a minute, we're really contributing to a system that's inefficient for you here. Let's start talking about joining the dots together. And again, forgive me for drifting into MBA-isms potentially, but
Yeah. No, it's okay. Yeah.
what you've got there is a disconnect internally, client side, probably between how they set marketing budgets, how they distribute that internally within the business, and how that needs to sit. You've got some companies that have a marketing budget that have to spend their marketing budget, irrespective of how it performs. Because if they don't, if they spend 20% less but gain 40%, normally you'd get a pat on the back. But next year you might get 20% less of your budget. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you've got to work with the people, the systems, and the power dynamics within the client's business and work through that. But there's not a lot that comes from those sort of volume plays, and if anything, that actually sort of encourages some of the worst ends of the business, which is just to dump. You lower the friction in your campaigns and you increase the volume coming through. I don't know, that doesn't really solve anything, or it doesn't gain anything for those brands. So
yeah.
very specifically, we're quite focused on that efficiency. And for me, I've sort of distilled it down into really a little very simple formula that we work around, which is that leads in plus transformation process, client side, equals success. So it's not leads equals success. It's leads and then what you do with them that defines what the success of the overall campaign and system is. And that means fundamentally we all have to work together.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. That's really great. So when you're out there just talking with clients, what's the sort of, you've been doing this for 6 years. What's sort of the main problems that you generally see over and over? That you go, okay, you talk with them for 5 minutes, and you're like, I already know the issue here.
Yeah.
What are those things that you generally see?
I mean, typically it's contact strategy. So, leads are fundamentally a client or potential client putting their hands up and saying, I'm interested in your products or services. But then that requires almost there's a very famous guy in the 80s who used to run Scandinavian Air Service called Jan Carlson, right? He wrote a book called, I forget what the book was called, but his big thing was Moments of Truth. So basically every single touch point with a company or service is your moment of truth to get your brand across to those clients, right? So very much that echoes with lead generation. Once you pass the lead across, that's your moment of truth. So you've got to get that first touch point with the customer is how they will judge you. Get it right, you're going to ace the lead supply, and you're going to do great things. If you get it wrong, you're always going to be chasing your tail. So the thing that I spend a lot of my time on is this first response strategy. The great rule of a first response strategy is to have a strategy.
Right.
You'll be surprised at how many companies just think, well, we'll just phone. Yeah. It doesn't work like that, right? You've got to have a strategy. If you've got a strategy, you've got to have aims, objectives, you've got to have metrics that you measure it by. You've got to have all of that down. The good news is there's lots of platforms people can use to sort of, boost that. The bad news is there's lots of platforms. So sometimes there's a disjoint in terms of your dialer system and your CRM system and all like that. So, but the first thing for me is, irrespective of the size of the business, it's that contact strategy. It's that first response. Yeah. Now, I know a lot of people will say you've got to pick up the phone straight away. And in fact, I'll say that pretty much all the time because phone conversations do work well. But it was interesting on your previous podcast, we were talking about the leaving an email or sending an SMS with the telephone number that you're going to be calling on, so that increases your chances of having a conversation. So all this first step, client side, is about increasing your chances of having a conversation, because your belief, client side, is once I have a conversation, I can bring you down my funnel and at the highest point of which I can turn it into value. I've got to talk to you. I've got to increase my chances of talking to you. That's a really great thing, that thing of, look out for a call from this number. Increasingly with iPhones, people they'll subconsciously recognize the shape of a number almost without reading it, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
They'll recognize it and then they'll answer it. So if you set that up, then of course they'll do it. But of course, with the great technology on iPhones, if I'm in Bristol and I've submitted a lead and the client is based in Manchester, and I get a telephone call from Manchester, I don't know it's them.
Yeah.
I don't pick the phone up.
Right.
Well, I'm way more likely personally to Google a telephone number than I am to pick it up on the phone.
Yeah. Well,
that has a couple of knock-on effects. One, client campaign design needs to be, put around that whole, this is what the next value point is going to be. But the other thing is, you've got to get that right. I think when we spoke earlier, I gave the metaphor, because ultimately we're all in a commercial environment. A shop is the best commercial environment. Is that if you're standing behind a counter and someone walks through the door, you're pretty sure you just don't hide behind the counter for 4 hours. You stand up and say, help you, or welcome to my shop. And I think that's the rule that we really need to just enforce, in terms of that first response strategy. We've got a load of evidence that shows categorically the quicker you call a lead, the more effective a lead supply is. It's almost irrefutable now. Although I would say it's the quicker you contact a client, the more likely it is to be successful. And therein lies quite a lot of discussion about what that means.
Right. And that's, and so you read my mind. That's what I wanted. I was like, let's dive a little bit deeper into the contact conversation, because
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. There's multiple studies that show, even by seconds that go by, the sooner you pick up the phone and contact that lead, the more success, the chances of success you'll have with that person. And it literally is like this curve. It goes like this, and it's like first 5 seconds, and then minutes, and then keeps going and going until days later. If you obviously didn't call it, you might as well just not. But that's okay. That's an overstatement. You still want to work the lead, but speed to contact is extremely important. However, I think I had a conversation with a person in the insurance industry months ago, and we were in a room with about 30 other executives across the lead gen, and he said something a little provocative, in that he didn't think speed to lead or speed to contact was as important as it used to be, because people aren't even picking up the phone now. So what you kind of goes along to what you were saying is maybe it's not maybe it's not just picking up the phone, but you also need to send a text message, or if it's opted in. But there's other contact strategy other than a phone call, or maybe that's combined with a phone call, that people need to think about as well.
Yeah, the key thing there is just to go old school on it. Of the first contact is to make yourself stand out from the crowd. So whatever strategy you can employ to make you stand out, employ it. But I'll guarantee you that the strategy of not contacting them at all is not a way to make you stand out from the crowd. Potentially, it could be. I have had some success with a client who has contacted immediately and said, listen, I'm not going to bombard you with calls. I'm going to give you a call in a few days. Because they thought they wanted, especially in one-to-many models, they thought, right, I want to be the last in, not the first in. And, I've been a lead buyer myself, and that strategy has worked sometimes. So it's all about picking the right strategy for you, given the circumstances that you've got in front of you. But yeah, sure, there's some super exciting things coming out with chatbots, with some of the more conversational styles of immediate first response. But really, it's just that touch point. It's just getting you into the brand.
Yeah.
There's micro branding opportunity, and that's why people should do it. Now, we used to run an acronym when I first started doing this, which was first response. It was called TEST, right? Telephone, email, SMS, telephone again, repeat. And just as I'll be honest with you, the acronym came first, and then I managed to fit it in. But that, the whole of the telephone, email, SMS. Basically, what you want is with your first call, if it's not successful, you then need a strategy to improve your chances of connection on the second call. And why not use all the tools available to you, i.e. SMS, which has a 96% read rate, or email, which has a far lower one. But, voicemail, 67% of people don't read them, listen to them, is one of the stats that I've heard recently. Sure, you should leave one, but does it really need to be the main focus? Short, sharp, sweet, onto your next contact.
Yeah.
Working with these contact strategies has been super interesting. It's massively about behavioral economics. A great combination of old school business practice, modern new approaches. It's a really, for me personally, it's a really great sort of just microcosm of commercial systems, because it's about, it's just about registering. It's basically like being in a market, isn't it? You're getting people there by attracting attention to you.
Yeah.
So, it's a good thing to do.
Yeah. One thing that's I want to just make a point is, we're talking about that curve when speed to lead and how soon you got to make those calls. But to what you were sort of mentioning with that one client is coming in last, is you don't just give up too after the first few days, right? Come back around.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
No, so absolutely not. So first contact strategy would be the first thing we work with, but then cadence strategy is, I think there's PhDs in both of those, right? Now, massive schools of study, although there's very little study that goes on, but maybe that's just sort of endemic of the whole sales in sort of universities these days. But
Yeah.
yeah, cadence is super important. So what I mean by cadence is just what you've determined, the length of time, the length of calls that you'll do. Now, we see, certainly consumer-facing verticals, if you've got a call cadence of about 12 calls, you're probably on point. But within that, this spacing between call 1, call 2, call 3, call 4, and how you interject there with the SMS and email support, it's a really, the answer to what is the best strategy there is, it depends, unfortunately.
Yeah.
but then what the actual answer to that is, there isn't a right strategy. What you've got to do is A/B test and keep iterating your processes until you hit the sweet spots that work for the team that you've got.
Yeah. So I had a question for you regarding, you said there's a lot of different platforms out there, and sometimes that's what's holding people back, or brands that's holding back, is not having the capabilities to have either the dialer or whatever it may be built out in a way that's testable
Sure.
and customizable. So are there not necessarily dialers, but are there a lead management system or CRMs that you generally would recommend people look into?
I mean, pretty much. I mean, I think if I look at all of our API feeds into CRMs, the vast majority are into Salesforce platforms of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
But we can API into any CRM system. The key thing is whether people are using their CRM systems as CRM systems, though. There's a lot of businesses out there that use a CRM system as a legacy mailer. It's just about printing addresses off. And then there are some really cutting edge ones that have got everything coming out of that CRM system. So their dialer feeds out of it. All of the business intelligence data comes out of that, so they can analyze the whole process. Staffing rotas go into it, the whole thing. We can work with any system.
Mm-hmm.
And work with pen and paper with clients. There's always a way to improve a system.
Yeah.
Like I said, the first step in that is recognizing that you need to have a strategy in place. If that's a Google Sheets strategy, fine.
Yeah.
We'll work with it. There are more optimum ways to run it. And actually, what's quite interesting is, you said before about, you could probably spend 5 minutes with the client and work out, what you need to do. One of the interesting things there is you can tell with a lead generation campaign whether it's effective or not, really by the contact rate number. It's one of the big floodlight metrics that I look at. So if I want to drive, let's say, appointments or visits or whatever as a key metric, really the number one metric I want to look at there is what's your contact rate. And if you're hitting 80%, you've got a good strategy. You're probably not going to get too many marginal gains from getting more improvements there. But if you're down at 40, 50%, then there's work to do, because you're only speaking to half the people that want to speak to you. So you've got to find a way to do it. So
is that sort of the numbers that you see generally for a contact rate? I maybe it depends on the vertical, but is that sort of what the expectation is, about 75 to 80% contact rate?
I think if you're looking in the 70 to 80%, you're generally hitting metrics that can then work. I mean, I think you always want to be, ideally it's a race to 100%, isn't it? But that's the race at close ratio. I was a salesman, I want to be hitting 100% close rates, everyone does. But yeah, if you've got a good cadence strategy and first response strategy in place, you probably, a 70 to 80% contact rate is probably good. That doesn't necessarily mean that the rest of that 20% that you don't end up talking to don't go through to positions of value, because there are some people that just want to conduct business by email and things. So they're falling through. It's just you'll hit most of your key metrics, I think.
Are these leads that you guys generally sell? Are they exclusive leads, or do they go to multiple?
We've got a mixture of models. It depends on the category. Also depends on the subcategory within them.
Yeah.
There are some things like hearing aids is quite a big one, or healthcare, where we do laser eye surgery as well. Where clients don't necessarily want to, or consumers don't necessarily want to go for multiple hearing tests.
Right.
Sort of visits. So it just sort of makes sense from a consumer user experience sort of view to work on an exclusive basis. And then there are some that are more transactional and do require. Certainly the B2B ones are typically quite focused towards one-to-many models. And things like the relocations market and some of the home improvements ones are a little more about multiple quotes.
Well,
But then there are some far more specific verticals that I
yeah,
guess
the reason why I
exclusive. We
ask
call
is,
them
yeah, go ahead.
one-to-one.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
The reason why I ask is because of that contact rate. In terms of the contact rate, so just give my some perspective, my own sort of perspective.
Yeah.
Generally here, and you're right, it does depend on the vertical, but generally, a mortgage lead or insurance lead or even a B2B lead, or they're sold generally 1 to 3 times.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
so a mortgage lead is going to go to 3 banks generally, and they're going to compete for that business. And that's how here, Lending Tree, which is one of the
Yeah.
older, more successful lead generation companies for refinance, remortgage, or purchase leads,
Sure.
and sort of stuff. But they sell it 3 times. And so when you think about that, the contact rates that generally I've seen here and leads are not good. They're not 80%.
Oh, really?
They're maybe 50, 60%. 60% would be good. And I don't think that's necessarily a factor of poor lead quality or even maybe selling it multiple times necessarily. I think it's maybe a shift of the US market and less people picking up the phone, kind of like what we were talking about.
Yeah. I mean, we see that quite. I mean, phone averse behavior. It's a field
Yeah.
of. It is quite clear. I think the last stats I saw in the UK were something like 20% of all smartphone users never use their smartphone for phone.
Yeah.
Use it, and that's increasing at, I
Yeah.
mean, alarming or interesting rate year on year. Yeah, I mean, again, so I go back there. It's about first response strategy again,
Yeah.
and is there a prevailing shift away from telephony? And there may well be. We do work with a lot of digital service providers who are really trying to get away from telephony altogether. That's not to say that there isn't a place for the lead generation market within that.
Of course, yeah.
And then of aligning to a digital delivery and checking that the same metrics apply, the same first response strategy applies. It just shifts in terms of its sort of application for the consumer and for the customer at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. So going back to Salesforce, so you see a lot of individuals using Salesforce, and then doing the add-ons and the different things that Salesforce allows you to do. There's not a platform that's specific, tailored very specifically towards leads. So for example, here we've got a number of different companies. Like one is called Velocify.
Yeah.
One is called Accelerate. Another one, Lead Mailbox, is one. There's a number of them that are very specific, that are more specific than a Salesforce that you sort of have to build out. It's going to have your rules on when a lead comes in, what happens. Does it go to this individual? Does it go to that individual? Does it trigger a call, email? And then has a full distribution, cycle of what to do with that lead as it goes out. And it's very customizable. Is there nothing like that necessarily in the UK market right now?
I mean, they exist, but I think in my experience with the clients that we've got, they're typically not using those platforms quite as much over in Europe and in Asia, Australasia. Although interesting, Velocify, I think if you do a search for any of the speed to lead stuff, they kind of tapped into basically every single report you pick up there is a Velocify one.
Yeah.
What's quite interesting there is they're actually quoting one study that was done. It was way back in 2009. Which is
the MIT study.
Yeah, it's quite a long time ago. I mean, I think all budding academics out there, that there's definitely a market for some up-to-date reports on that. But no, typically, I mean, I love those platforms, because at its best, lead scoring, lead distribution, all of those kind of rules are ultimately all part of what that call of that first response strategy, internal strategy on how you maximize your lead utility. So, the more that can come in, the better. I think what I do see, though, is that there are sometimes some barriers to entry client side for the complexity of those models. And, whilst we take the customers on a journey up to the point where those kind of platforms might well come into play and sort of make it work. The US, of course, have always got a head start there because you guys have always had the super high volume, super high, the requirements to do all of that splitting out of lead supplies have always come from that, that US style of high volume lead generation.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, it's
in
just
that respect, I do consider us as sort of a US style lead generator. We do high volume campaigns.
yeah.
Um, and those campaigns would be, in some cases, with clients, much more effective if we had those platforms in play. Yeah, for sure.
So it got me thinking, one of the things that they do is around distribution of a lead. So when a lead comes in, so whether it's like, let's say it's a moving lead with somebody in Bath, well, that lead should then go to Ben, of course,
Yeah,
and distribute to you, and you call because, hey, you're there, you're local, and you probably can have a connection and talk, whatever it
sure.
is. And so I know, people, companies will distribute, not only just bring it in, just throw it into the sales pit, and just have
Yeah,
anybody call it, but they'll start distributing leads based on potential likelihood of success with an
yeah,
actual specific agent. And that's, sounds, I guess, could be relatively it could be as complicated as you want to make it, or it could just be, okay, all the leads in this area go to this guy, all these types of leads go to this guy and this guy, and you kind of change it around. Do you see companies sort of doing that more complex
yeah. I
distribution?
do, and I had that whole complex ecosystem once described to me as putting the right jockey on the right horse.
Yeah,
Which
yeah,
ultimately, that's really what it is. No, for sure. Like I said, at its most complex level, or you can make them as complex as you want those systems. They work very, very well. I think there's also I do see that sort of federal, when you've got organizations with very large geographies, what you do end up sometimes having is an operational system that is driving the customer journey rather than a customer driving the operational system. But to take my shop metaphor, what you got there is a bit like someone walking into the shop and then 10 salespeople behind the desk arguing about who should talk to them first, whilst the customer's waiting, if you see what I mean.
yeah,
So
yeah,
you sometimes find that if you've got a lead distribution system, what it's not taking into account is the fact that that customer needs to be spoken to first, and they're trying to distribute it out too cleanly and too evenly for themselves. So that's my war. It's a war on operational systems driving customer journeys rather than customers influencing what operational systems should look like. So
yeah,
a lot of that can get mixed up. Ultimately, what your system needs to be is about how can I most effectively talk to the customer quickly and do it in the most efficient way for my organization as it stands. So it goes back to that sort of contextual kind of design.
yeah. You can certainly make it more too complicated, right?
Yeah,
And
to the
actually
extent that
hurt yourself.
you never talk to anyone. Yeah,
Yeah. But that also brings up, when you took that analogy of the, consumer walking in the room, it's also it made me think about the marketing guy that was also standing in the way of the sales guy that wants to talk. Right. And
yeah,
so
absolutely.
consumer go this way, and so there's always, sometimes there's the communication is an issue between marketing and sales as well.
Always.
Right.
Well,
Um,
it's a lot. Yeah, it's a long fabled battle, that isn't it? I mean, I do sometimes talk to people and say the sort of the lead, at its best, the lead generation model can effectively remarry the divorced parents of marketing and sales together after sort of 50 years of basically living apart. Because in order to run an effective lead generation campaign, you've got to have the sales information in there about what's converting and how and who and where. And then you've got to have the, adjusting those inflows in. You can actually remove quite a lot of that battle with that information. So we do see a lot of those conversations. I do see it coming back. At heart, it's a great art, the art of sales. It's an important part of a commercial business. It's an often maligned part of a business. But you can't say marketing's more important than sales. Sales is more important than marketing. It's marketing sales, isn't it?
right.
Let's
Right.
bring
Sales and
it together.
marketing. Yep.
Sales and marketing. Bring
Yeah.
it back together.
Yeah. Um, before we wrap up, I am kind of, maybe I'll put you on the spot just a little bit.
Go for it.
When we're thinking about lead buyers, a lot of times and I think we talked about, I can't remember if this was when we hit record or before or after,
Yeah.
but there is a sense sometimes of a lack of trust with
Yeah.
finding the partners, because unfortunately they all sometimes sound the same, right? Unfortunately, there's companies that say the same pitch that MVF may have.
Yeah.
But the two operations are completely different, and the output of those operations could be completely different. As a lead buyer, how does one sort of navigate that, and what tips do you give to somebody that's sort of trying to identify, without knowing, what companies they should work with and which ones they shouldn't, without just throwing money at it and testing? Because that's one way to find out, and it's not a good way. But before you get to that point, is there any advice
Well,
for?
I think certainly in the sort of TCPA, GDPR days,
Mhm.
compliance has got to be one of the big factors by which you judge an organization that's purporting to be able to send you leads. They've got to be compliant, right? Otherwise, you shouldn't be in the game.
Yeah, so checking their websites, checking the brands, or the sites that they use, and looking for that compliance and those
Yeah,
disclaimers.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think increasingly the way I move is towards, case studies, the standard due diligence stuff that you would do on a potential partner. I think what you want to do there is what all consumers are doing these days, isn't it? You do your research on the internet, find out about stuff, and then speak to them, right? And I'm a
Yeah.
big believer in the whole face-to-face or the Zoom, which
Yep.
is as but after speak to them and understand. And just I think that my definite top tip for any lead buyers is to be wary of overt lead sellers. Now that might sound counterintuitive for someone in the lead generation business, but ultimately for me, if I want to sell 5,000 leads to someone, before numbers are even mentioned, you've got to understand how many salespeople they've got, what the contact center's like, what their capacity is, what their aims are for those for X number of leads, what their budgets are, and all of that kind of stuff. And then you can determine how many leads need to come in. But if someone's picked up the phone and said, "I've got 5,000 leads, do you want to buy them?"
Yeah.
I think always you want to be looking at alarm bells ringing everywhere there. So due diligence, I think, and then looking at personal relationships there and walking through with your sales staff. I mean, we spend a lot of time with our commercial teams, almost educating them in marketing processes, campaigns, growth strategies, so that they are equipped to have a growth conversation.
Yeah.
Not how many leads do you want this month? Because again,
Yeah.
the transactional. I said it at the beginning.
I'm sure you get a sense
gotta
that that someone actually wants to partner with you when they're asking those questions, and they're really trying to learn about the process. You can get a sense of they're not just trying to sell leads.
Exactly. Again, I'll come back to it. Systems guy, partnerships give you the opportunity to expand within that relationship. You expand towards success, but also as a lead generator, what that's done increasingly for MVF is it's got us into positions where we're looking to assist clients with their additional lead generation leads. So we run white label campaigns, we run branded campaigns for them on the same model. We can still help them because we are fundamentally in partnership and driving towards the same metrics. It opens up so much more opportunity than picking up the phone and doing another cold call and trying to find someone else to sell 50, 100, 200 leads to.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm excited because we've talked about getting you involved with Lead Generation World and speaking and presenting, and I'm not sure we completely nailed that down, but I'm really
Love to.
happy that you joined me today and are also interested in participating in Lead Generation World, because all this information, like I said earlier, is the catalyst for the whole industry to grow.
I think so. Absolutely.
Yeah, when you have an educated buyer, brand, and then lead sellers at the same token, talking and working in transparent fashion, the partnerships are endless in terms of growth. So it's great to have these conversations now, and then obviously at Lead Generation World in October. I got to plug a little bit. But yeah, I'm excited to have you. So how does someone, if they want to, reach out to you, have more questions and talk a little bit about this sort of stuff, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
I think the best way through LinkedIn or through my email, which I'm happy to share, and you can pop up. Always I mean, you'll have noticed I'm always happy to talk about this.
Yeah.
But always happy to talk about this with anyone else in the industry. Ultimately, like you said, the industry grows the more that good businesses do good work with good clients.
Love it. I appreciate you joining me today, Ben, and I wish you the best of luck moving forward, and we'll be in touch regarding the conference.
Fantastic. Thanks very
All right.
much.
Thanks, Ben.
Take care.